Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here, and today we're going to start off with a video discussing the latest fixture amendments as well as looking at the best fixtures and players to target, which is a good place to start when we are looking to build our Game Week 17 drafts. So if you guys do enjoy this video, please give it a like and also subscribe as well if you are new around here. So during the break, the Premier League made some announcements which gave rise to a couple of double game weeks, in particular Game Week 19, 20 and 23. But you'll realize that I've also included Game Week 21 and 25 in this slide as well, right? Even though nothing has been announced there by the Premier League as of yet. But there's good reason for that. We'll go game week by game week. I'll share some of my thoughts on what I feel about these double game weeks as we go along. So first up, we have Game Week 19. Now this is confirmed to be a double game week for Chelsea and Fulham. So one look, and the first thing that comes to mind is the fixture crunch of both teams having FA Cup games sandwiched in between the Game Week 19 games. And in particular, Chelsea play Man City twice as well. Once in the Premier League for Game Week 19 and once in the FA Cup. So already as it stands, there was already going to be rotation you'd expect from Potter. But given that they play Man City twice, we could even expect more rotation there. So thinking about it, it's just a little tough to kind of predict which Chelsea assets would feature in both games. So I would proceed with a little bit of caution here. As for Fulham, it probably would be a little bit easier. You'd expect maybe Mitrovic and Andreas to feature in both of them. So these are really the two assets that I kind of like from Fulham as well. I wouldn't go anywhere else. Next up, we have double game week 20, which is potentially a double for Man City and Tottenham. Now, it hasn't been announced and it is subject to the FA Cup results for both of these teams, which we won't know until just before the Game Week 20 deadline. So there's a couple of ways we could go about navigating Game Week 20 if it happens to be a double. So firstly, for City, we probably would already be tripled up on them, so no issues in terms of getting City assets. But for Spurs, if we do want Spurs assets against Arsenal and City, which once again isn't great, but say we do want them, there's a couple of ways we could navigate this. Firstly, we could go with Spurs assets from the start. So maybe Kane from the start, right? Have him in our Game Week 17 squad and he'll be in our teams all the way up till the double if it does happen. Another way is to kind of save 2 free transfers and go into Game Week 20 with some room to make changes there. So 2 ways we could go about this, and honestly I feel like at this point I wouldn't go for Kane in my Game Week 17 drafts because there are so many good forward options that are worth considering at this point. Cheap forward options like maybe Nketiah, some of us are thinking about it, Martial as well, right? And of course there's Mitrovic and Darwin Núñez who are the standout picks as well. So much value there. I probably wouldn't go for Kane. In terms of Kulusevski, maybe it'd probably be a little bit more of a discussion there. So there's Game Week 20, on to Game Week 21, and this is only a potential double game week. So nothing announced by the Premier League as of yet, but according to Ben Krillin on Twitter, there is a very good chance that we see some games being shifted here based on the EFL Cup and FA Cup results. So the exact tweet from Ben Krillin actually goes, Game Week 21 will probably be a double game week, but Arsenal and Everton is the only game that can move there at the moment. More games would be able to move to Game Week 21 if neither side reach the EFL Cup semi-finals or the FA Cup 4th round. So essentially what we can gather from this is that there's quite a number of variables involved. The EFL Cup, the FA Cup, it's so difficult to plan for this and kind of decide which teams would actually come into Game Week 21. So I would say that it's tough to plan for it, but it is important to have at the back of our minds that there's a 60% chance that Arsenal and Everton would move to Game Week 21, making it a double Game Week 21 for both of these teams. So something important to consider as well. And next up is double Game Week 23. Now this is a confirmed double game week for Arsenal and City, but obviously since they play each other, it's not that fantastic, but still a double game week. And the thing is, we would already be targeting these players from the get-go, right? So Arsenal and City, they've been on fire this season. So we would already be loaded with these players. It's more about choosing the right players from these teams to have. And before I get into Game Week 25, it is worth mentioning that the triple captainship is one that would be very lucrative for a lot of people, considering that City double in possibly 2 of these game weeks that we just mentioned above, right? But something to consider as well about the triple captainship, right, is that it could be a double-edged sword. So what I mean by this is basically we could take it in one hand by saying that difficult fixtures in the double game week means that Haaland will play both games, right? But the flip side is, right, because those are tough games, we could see Haaland, possibly get very limited returns in those as well. Now, if we were to target double game week fixtures with possibly two easy fixtures, then the flip side is that Haaland could miss out in one, because potentially they don't really need him for those games. They could very well just win the opposition without him. So two ways to look at it, and I probably would be tempted to use the chip, to be honest, but I think at this point it is something that I have at the back of my mind, and I think I would be keen to use it if I do see some really hot form from Haaland. If he started the season as well as if he's restarting the season as well as he started the season, then what I feel is like I probably would use it, right? But no promises here. It's just something at the back of my mind. And lastly is blank Game Week 25, which hasn't been announced yet. It's pretty far away, so nothing too much to worry about, but it's still good to know that Game Week 25 will be on the weekend of the EFL Cup final. So what that means is that both teams who are involved in the final, assuming both are Premier League teams, which usually is the case, then those teams as well as their Premier League opponents would all miss out altogether. So this is pretty much a rundown of the next few game weeks, which we will have to keep in mind because it will kind of influence whether we want to go for players from a certain team or not. So on to the best fixtures, and this is based on the Fantasy Football Hub fixture ticker, and the top 5 teams are Chelsea, Fulham, Southampton and Manchester United. So touching on City first, they've got Leeds and Everton, so two good fixtures right after the restart, and then they face a tougher game against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, followed by the potential double game week 20 that we spoke about earlier. And before they double again in game week 23, they will face Wolves and Spurs. So on the balance, it's a good run for City, but let's be honest, we would already be targeting them regardless of whether they have a good run or not, because they are still Man City after all. So the key decisions here would actually be whether we triple up on them from the start, or we go with 2 and then bring one more in when we get confirmation of the game week 20 double. So we will have to keep in mind though, right, there is the fixture crunch, and the gap between Leeds and Everton is one that we will have to pay extra attention to, because those games are less than 3 days apart. 2 days and 19 hours to be exact. So we should expect some rotation there, and I would actually prefer going with safer picks just because of the fixture crunch. So let's say if I was tripling up on City from the start, then the likes of Haaland, Cancelo and Kevin De Bruyne come to mind. And if I was holding out until game week 20, then possibly I'd entertain Kevin De Bruyne versus Foden debate. So next up is Chelsea, and they've arguably have the best set of fixtures out of the blocks with Bournemouth, Forest and a double in game week 19. So the next couple are not too bad as well, with home games against Palace and Fulham in the next 4. So the issue with them would probably be which players to go for, whether we want to subject ourselves to Potter rotation, which has been a feature of this Chelsea team before the World Cup. So something to note as well is, just as I was recording this video, Reece James has been stated to have played 60 minutes in the behind closed doors friendly against Brentford, which Chelsea won 5-1. So make of that what you guys will. Is that enough for you to bring Reece James into your team? Because it seems like he's back fit as well, and probably he's the one with the highest ceiling and one that we could potentially take a risk on, even though there could be rotation for him because of how good he is, and basically his potential for hauls, right? We could subject ourselves to the risk of having him just because of that, right? So pay attention to that as well. And next up we have Fulham. So they are pretty much here because of those first 3 game weeks after the restart, where they have Palace, Southampton and then a double against Leicester and Chelsea, because after that it just becomes a hot mess. Newcastle, Tottenham and Chelsea in the next 4. So realistically it's just the first 3 that we're targeting if we're going for Fulham assets here. And then on to Southampton. I know they haven't really impressed this season, sitting at 19th at this point, which isn't great, but from a fixture standpoint, you could argue that across these 7 game weeks, Southampton have the most balanced one. So they don't play any of the top 6 at all, and their home games are against Brighton, Forest, Villa and Wolves, and their away games are against Fulham, Everton, Brentford, which aren't the worst at all. So the problem here is actually that there aren't too many standout options. So we're going to the players that I think we can consider later on. But most of these players that we probably want from Southampton are probably going to be benched for this. So what I will say is that the fixtures are good, and sometimes fixtures do bring results. So this will probably be a good chance for Southampton to kind of get back to winning ways, and I would expect them to take full advantage of that. So probably their assets could try to deliver in the next couple of game weeks as well. And lastly, there's Manchester United with a sea of green fixtures from now all the way till game week 25. In fact, bar the two red fixtures that we see on the screen, where they have City and Arsenal back-to-back in game week 20 and 21. So I do like the first three fixtures for sure, where they play Forest, Wolves, and Bournemouth, who are the bottom three for expected goals. So we could be looking at a couple of clean sheets here, and of course they are poor defenses as well, right? Bournemouth, Forest, and Wolves are all not that great in their defense as well. So hauls for attackers like maybe Rashford, Bruno Fernandes, Martial could be on the horizon as well. But something important I felt I should mention is that Varane and Lisandro Martinez would be out because of their involvements in the World Cup in the final, which was an incredible game, right? But focusing here on FPL, Varane and Martinez would both be out. So Harry Maguire would be set to come in alongside Lindelof. So it would be a little bit of a different defensive line to what we're used to seeing Manchester United, at least in the last couple of games before the World Cup. So the important bit now is basically how that will affect the Manchester United defense, right? Will it still be as solid as we once saw it to be? Because Ten Hag actually really improved that defense. So now that these two key players are out, right, how will the defense line kind of respond? And that may bring a kind of a different dynamic to the whole Manchester United team on a whole as well. Now for the important bit, which is the players that we should target from these teams, and I've ranked them from those I believe are the best options to those I think aren't 100% necessary but are decent options as well. So starting with City, we have Haaland, who's pretty much essential for obvious reasons, followed by Cancelo for how nailed he is as a City defensive asset with good attacking potential. I've seen some drafts that have gone without Cancelo, but realistically I don't see myself taking that chance, especially since we just mentioned just now there's going to be movements in the fixtures further down the line, and I don't think that going for Kyle Walker would kind of give me the same security as I would feel going for Cancelo. Cancelo is probably just a set and forget, but if I do have to spend a transfer on Walker, if he happens to get dropped for a couple of games, and then also have to manage those movements in the double game weeks, I probably find myself in a tough spot. So just for safety wise, I would say that Cancelo is a better option there. And then Kevin De Bruyne. So these are the first three, right? So these three are actually the three that I would go with if I was tripling on City from game week 17. But for budget reasons, if we have to go elsewhere, then I probably would consider Foden and Akanji further down the list. But with Foden, I think we will have to be aware of the fixture crunch and rotation that is very likely for City, especially for the first 2 to 3 game weeks right after the restart, where the crunch is just insane. For my latest draft, actually, which I will upload soon, I've actually got the first two. So I have Haaland and Cancelo, but that's because at the moment I'm leaning towards having Salah first and then bring in either Kevin De Bruyne or Foden come game week 20 if they do get the double against Spurs. So currently that's the thinking going on in my mind. And next up we have Chelsea, and the best option here has to be Reece James, right, who is now back in full first team training. Great news for us, and on top of that he's played 60 minutes in the behind closed doors friendly against Brentford. So Chelsea, as we mentioned, have a juicy set of fixtures that I think I can see Reece James hauling in that. But he's just come back from injury, so even though he did get a good maybe 60 minutes in the Brentford game, we will have to pay attention to how his minutes are actually managed when the Premier League restarts. Because I do expect them to actually ease him back into the game. So I don't expect him to start all the games per se, but maybe the first 3 to 4 out of 5, I think we could be seeing some hauls there if he's able to start at least those number of games. So he's currently in my team at the moment as well, right, alongside the next player on the list, who is Kepa. A problem is that Kepa, at this point, he does seem like the one who is ahead of Mendy, but at this point, because he just came back from rehab, right, he just came back from an injury that kept him out for quite a while, he could be rested for the first few games, even though he is probably first choice. So something else to pay attention to as well. Now, the next two players I'm not very confident of, but if we wanted to start with more Chelsea players, if you guys want to target more Chelsea players and kind of go for those fixtures. The ones that I'd be willing to take a gamble on would be Cucurella and Mason Mount. So from Fulham, there's really only two players that we should be looking at, and that's Mitrovic and Andreas. I'd imagine that these two players would also be a prominent feature in most Game Week 17 drafts, but I guess it's worth putting them here as the only two because no one else I feel from Fulham should be considered. I've seen Leno in some teams, I wouldn't go there myself. Save points, yes, I understand that, but Fulham's expected goals conceded was the worst in the league before the World Cup. So I actually really do just recommend Mitrovic and Andreas in staying away from the Fulham defense. Now, Southampton is a tricky one, but I would imagine that we won't be starting with these players regularly, even if we went for them. So probably a bench fodder, and I'd say maybe Kyle Walker-Peters, if he's fit, is my top choice. Hopefully he's back in time for the restart, but if not, then Perrault is also someone that has come into the light. Right? A lot of players are actually a lot of FPL managers are actually targeting Perrault because of those Southampton fixtures, and he did pick up a couple of goals and assists just before the World Cup as well. So I think he's a decent option. And then there's Salisu, who is a rock at the back for Southampton. So all these three players are actually 4.4, so they're really good at this price range for bench fodders as well. And lastly, there's Che Adams for those who really want to go different, punt on a Southampton attacker. They usually don't score a lot, but I think if they do, most of the time it's usually Che Adams. And that's actually kind of why I think if I were to go for a Southampton attacker, it probably would just have to be Che Adams and no one else. Right, and as for United, my top pick would actually be Rashford ahead of players like maybe Fernandes and Martial because of the value that he brings at his price point, right? Sure, Martial costs the same as well, but he is made of glass and I wouldn't want to count on his fitness record. So for me, Rashford is the better option. He's had a great World Cup. He's got awesome form, and also provided he doesn't go to PSG, of course, I think he's pretty much one of those players that probably will be locked in my team. Right, so next up, I actually placed Dalot as the next player I want from United because of how good the three fixtures from United are from a defensive standpoint. But he is also a very attacking player, so there's a good chance for double-digit hauls here. But there's some talk of him pulling up in the last game that Portugal had in the World Cup, so we will have to keep an eye out for that. And thereafter, after Dalot, I'd probably go for Bruno Fernandes, who could be on pens now given that Ronaldo has left Manchester United and the data has always backed Bruno Fernandes without Ronaldo than with. So if he could go back to the Bruno Fernandes of old in the 2020-21 season where he was kind of essential in all teams, then that'd be really great. But as of now, I think that's a little bit more of a gamble. Based on what we saw this season, he probably wouldn't shoot up to those numbers, and it's actually Rashford who has the superior numbers as well. Now lastly, there's Martial, who I don't really think is worth that forward slot if you ask me. So there's only one slot left, assuming we go for Mitrovic and Haaland. And we would probably be considering Darwin Núñez, who I feel is a better option at that point, given that Diaz and Jota are ruled out until the end of January. So, but of course, if it's a budget issue, if we can't go for Darwin Núñez, who I feel should be given that third forward spot, then I guess you could argue that bringing, freeing up some funds by going for Martial instead to fill that last slot, you could kind of justify that as well. So finally, there's Luke Shaw, who I'm not opposed to bringing in if Dalot is not fit to restart the season. I do see some clean sheets for United, especially in the first 3 games. So he's probably the one I would choose if Dalot misses out. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And before I leave you guys, I wanted to make a small little announcement for our Discord channel. So there's a nice little community there, us chatting every day about FPL. And it's nice to have a group of passionate FPL managers chatting FPL and supporting each other. So I also give personalized team feedback there, and we also have channels for early team leagues, predicted lineups, and of course a prize league among all of us there. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, something you'd like to be part of, and also you'd like to support the channel in the process, all you have to do is become a Pro Tier member by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button, and that's pretty much it, right? Pro Tier members get access to all these benefits, and if this doesn't interest you at all, then that's totally fine as well. I still really appreciate you watching the videos, and especially watching till this point as well. So I hope this was useful for you, and that's it for now. I'll catch you guys in the next one very soon. Bye-bye.